This week on the Virtual Skeptics, Bob lays down the law. Eve finds a ghost. Barb is not Googling. And Tim is hosting, as you may have noticed, and is doing the news blur for once. And here we are. Hi, everybody. I'm your host, Tim Farley. Brian is in Disney vicinity, and so he's not here. And here we are, and we've got Barb, and we've got everybody else, and we're live here Wednesday. So if you're watching us live, you can get on the Q&A app, or you can get on the hashtag and talk to us. But let me introduce the panel. Our panel this week, first is Bob Blaskiewicz, CSI's conspiracy guy, web columnist, and blogger for Skeptical Humanities and Skepticality contributor.
And he thinks he's the king of clubs.
And he thinks he's the king of clubs. Is this your card? Eve Siebert, editor and blogger at Skeptical Humanities and contributor to Skepticality and Insight at skeptic.com. Barbara Drescher, former psychology instructor, blogger at ICBS Everywhere, and contributor to numerous skeptical projects, including Insight at skeptic.com and The Odds Must Be Crazy. And me. I am Tim Farley. I'm a blogger at SkepTools and Insight at skeptic.com. I'm occasionally on Skepticality, but not this week. And I created What's the Harm and used to do some stuff for JREF. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Tim.
Hi,
Tim. Again, if you're watching live, you can talk to us via the Virtual Skeptics hashtag on Twitter. You can comment below the YouTube on youtube.com. If you're watching this on our blog, just click the little YouTube logo right down there, and you can go where the comments are on YouTube and comment there, or you can use the Q&A app, which is a little yellow icon approximately here. And so if you notice something we missed, there's somebody using the Q&A app, so it is in fact working. But the first thing we do every week is we have a trivia question. This week the trivia question is kind of similar to the one last week. I'm going to give you the name of a famous personality from the history of skepticism, and you tell me what he was famous for inventing. He was a 19th century fellow known for starting his career in New York and then moving, I think, to Boston, and his name was William Mumler. What did he invent of skeptic interest? All right, so work on that, and I'll try to pay attention to the results out there, see who's answering. And I think first up this week we have Barbara, right?
Guess so.
All right. Tell us about the latest on Google.
Well, I think it was you that posted this. I saw this on Facebook.
I did post it.
Yeah. Some new research that basically I saw a Washington Post headline that said internet searches are convincing us we're smarter than we really are. The word smart is kind of ill-defined, so I was a little bit skeptical, but at the same time, since I study narcissism and I know a few things about overconfidence, I wasn't entirely skeptical. So I read the article, and it's actually, the piece in the Washington Post is actually pretty good. It describes it very well. And I was really interested. I found the research actually really interesting. At first, it looks like the study wasn't that well designed, but then as you keep reading, they did study after study after study, and they actually narrowed down some of the confounds and things like that. And there are some things that we can take away from this that I think are really interesting. So basically what the researchers did is they had people, the research was actually done online, but they had a very large sample size. And they did do a decent job of checking for some of the problems, like whether or not people actually did use the internet when they were told to. But they divided them into two groups. And some people were asked to search the internet for the answers to a number of problems. And some people were asked not to use the internet for this. So in the first phase, that's what you get. In the second phase, they asked people to rate their confidence on how they think they could answer these questions. And it was in a completely different domain. So the questions were in a different domain, but they were things that you could have answered, by looking them up on the internet. And what they found is that people who had used the internet rated themselves as more confident, or rated their ability to answer the second set of questions, which were unrelated, higher than people who didn't use the internet to search. That's not even what's interesting, because there's lots of explanations for that. What's interesting is they did a whole series of these experiments, and they varied certain things. And what they found out was not only was the increase, or not only was the difference it wasn't a decrease in confidence for people who couldn't use the internet. They took a baseline, and they found that what happened was when people used the internet or searched the internet for the answers, their confidence in the subsequent questions increased. That's not even the interesting thing. They were able to determine that the increase was not due to access to information. So you would think that just because they had the information in front of them that made them feel more confident. And that was my first thought about it, because when you have the information in front of you, it's sort of like you get into things like hindsight bias, where you think that you know something, or you should have known something after you already know it, or that you think that you did know it.
It happens to me constantly, and it's so frustrating.
Thought you knew it after you already know it? Yeah.
After someone tells me, and I go, that sounds familiar somehow.
Uh-huh. Oh, I knew that. Or if you've ever played Trivial Pursuit, and then you get the answer to something, and you're like, oh, I knew that. No, you didn't, or you wouldn't have answered the question. We think that familiarity, we often mistake familiarity and understanding for knowledge. I saw this in the classroom all the time. People who think that they'll do better on multiple choice actually just feels better, is what it does. It feels better because you have these choices, you can choose from among them, whereas if you have to produce the information, it's much more difficult. And once you're told the information, you might remember having learned it before, but that's not quite the same thing. So yes, you recognize it, but it's the difference between recognition and recall.
I had a psychologist tell me a couple months ago. She was talking about her students, and she was saying that they can often regurgitate things but not use them.
Right.
So they have the information but not the understanding. That's totally different. I probably shouldn't have brought it up.
It is. No, it's not totally different, actually, because that's students who think that they understand something. A lot of times, all they understand is that they've got the terminology and they've written the right words in the right boxes. That isn't the same thing as having a full enough understanding to be able to recall it and explain it to somebody else. And what I used to tell students all the time is that if you really want to know something, if you really want to understand something well enough at least to be able to pass one of my exams, then practice explaining it to other people. Because if you can explain it to other people in a way that they understand it, then you know you have a grasp on it. And so that they understand it, that it makes sense. Not just, sounds like this construct of, a map. And so that it actually has meaning for them. So anyway, the point is I really thought that it would have something to do with having that information in front of them, but this isn't why people rated themselves higher. Because what they did is they had them search for a specific website. So they still had to search for it, but they were told, okay, look for the answer for why golf balls have dimples on the Scientific American website. So they knew that that's the information that they would get. And they also had to report the URL, the complete URL. So they would know that people actually did look for it on the Scientific American website, find that information, and then use it. And in that study, or that experiment, the control group was given the information that's on the Scientific American website. So we know that these two groups had the same access to the same information. And yet, the group who searched for it still reported higher confidence in their ability to answer these subsequent questions that had nothing to do with the questions they had just answered.
So wait a minute. Did they just hand the control group a piece of paper with dimples?
No, this was all done online, but that same text was then put into the survey.
Mm-hmm.
So they were given the same text. So the access to the information was not what did it. Then the other thing that they discovered is that what they really wanted to know is, are people thinking about it in terms of having access to information? So in the subsequent questions, are they assuming that are they assuming that they're going to be able to search the internet, but is that ability why they do that? And it isn't. They're actually conflating the shared knowledge that they get on the internet with the knowledge that's in their head. And how they found this out is they replaced the questions asking them how confident they were with a visual scale that basically looks like, or was photos of MRI, brain activity shown by MRI. And they asked them about how active their brain would be while answering those questions, because that would correspond then with their ability to answer those questions. Does that make sense? And
yeah.
The people in the internet search group chose higher activity. So they really think that this is about how much knowledge they have. So people are conflating the information they get from internet searches with the information that's in their head.
Right.
So this is, this argument, or this idea actually goes way back. I mean, when the printing press, came about it, and people started having more access to books, philosophers and people thought that that memory would suffer because of it, because now we can go look up something in a book, so we won't have to remember it. And there's a lot of truth to that. Now that when the internet came along, people had that concern about memory, and it's probably a valid concern to a point. But there's a lot more to know, too. And
like what do you replace it with when you don't have to store those things in your brain? Do you then make use of that brain capacity to do other useful things, or does it just go?
Probably. I think there's more. I think there's probably something to be said for having more specific knowledge or more expertise in areas, and having more procedural knowledge and things like that, rather than knowledge of facts, filling our our heads with facts and trivia that we can look up, things like that. But what's so interesting about that is I wonder if the same trend happened with books. People confuse what they can look up in a book with their own knowledge base, because that's what's so interesting about this research is we're actually confusing our access to information with the information itself, or with our own memories. It's just absolutely fascinating. So what I thought was also interesting about it is I've studied narcissism, and one of the aspects of narcissism is overconfidence for quite some time, and I've actually studied overconfidence specifically in educational situations. And it's fascinating because there are lots of different sources of the increases in narcissism that we have, and the internet has been blamed for some of that increase, but it's always focused on social networking. It's always focused on the vanity aspect of narcissism, that people who use social networks are using it to promote themselves. It's all self-promotion, and that encourages more narcissism and blah blah blah. And this is the first time I've ever seen anybody look at it in terms of the overconfidence aspect of it. And overconfidence isn't limited to narcissism, but it's a huge part of it. And to think that the internet might have this effect on overconfidence that's completely unintended, and it's due to an aspect of the internet that is actually extremely helpful, I think is really fascinating. So,
Agreed.
Yeah. So I would actually encourage you to read the study because it's pretty fascinating. There's about, I think there's like 10 or 12 experiments in it, and they're all just a little bit different. You know, they each just tweak a little thing here and there to tease all these things out.
Well, and we talked about this before we went on air, but I'm claiming credit for calling this the Dunning-Google effect.
See, and
because as far as I can tell, nobody used that as the headline. Barb disagrees that that's an accurate way to...
No, it's not an inaccurate way. The Dunning-Kruger effect is, it's not, you know, it sort of applies here. It does and it doesn't. People weren't asked to rate themselves in comparison to other people, so that's a little problematic.
Right.
But they both tap into that the self-protection effect, that self-inflation effect that we have. And my first thought when I read it was the Alex Trebek effect, which is something that I used to talk about in the classroom all the time, because it's that idea that if you have the answers in front of you and you think it's the hindsight thing that we were talking about, then and you recognize it and it makes sense to you, it feels right, you believe that you already knew it. Alex Trebek always seems so freaking smug to me. He just does. His tone, when people get something wrong, half the time his tone and the way he looks at them, it's like, yeah, it's like, why didn't you know that? You scum. And he's got the freaking answers in front of him.
I think it's really tactless when he goes up and slaps them.
Yes. That's problematic, yeah. But
it's unfortunate, really.
honestly, he does feel that way. I mean, he just gives me that feeling that he's saying, ugh. And he has the answers in front of him. And even when he didn't have the answers in front of him, I'm sure the man just feels so, his self-confidence must be so inflated because he's constantly in that position of having the answers.
How sure of that are you, Barb?
I'm pretty confident.
And did you Google...
I Googled Alex
Trebek's self-confidence level before you...
So
I'm sure part of that is that, you know, as the host of the show, his job is to project control.
Authority.
I'm in control.
Yeah,
I'm in authority
maybe.
of the situation, and that's, you know, so that's what he's doing.
But what about Barker's beauties?
Barker's beauties?
Yeah, the Price is Right models who sometimes give away cars.
Yeah, I saw that the other day.
Yeah.
All right. I was looking to see if anybody had any questions. I don't see any. So let's jump right into my topic. I don't have a big topic this week, so I'm going to do something others have done before, which is News Blur. Yay! I'm just going to do a few stories of general interest that I saw this week. One is a breaking headline from this afternoon. There was a classic What's the Harm story from Quebec from a couple years ago where a fellow who had some sort of chronic illness that his regular doctor couldn't solve for him went to a naturopath, and asked for some help, and she decided to inject him with a magnesium solution. Now, fundamentally, she's not, under Quebec law, supposed to be injecting anything into anybody because naturopaths are not allowed to do that up there. So that was fundamentally what was going on, but apparently also there was some sort of bacteria or something in the solution that he was injected with, and he died like very shortly thereafter, like the next day. And the naturopath was prosecuted, but the case ended today with a not guilty, even though the naturopath was not supposed to be injecting anybody with anything. Not guilty.
Do
of
you know what the rationale was?
I don't know. I don't know. The rationale was that
The jury had Googled it.
She had some training and some certification in other jurisdictions to do that type of stuff. So even though it was against the standard of care there, the judge felt like she hadn't proceeded incorrectly. So the prosecutor is...
All right, well, that judge has to go to that naturopath from now on.
Yeah, well, the prosecutor is pursuing a possible appeal, so we'll see what happens. The other thing that I've got is something about a site that I spoke about way back. Let me put the slide up. Way back in Virtual Skeptics number 30, almost 2 years ago, which was this site called Reality Drop, which was essentially a game. It was one of these online games, or they call it gamification, where you do things like Foursquare. You check in when you go to a restaurant, and it gives you a score, and it gives you badges, and it gives you this feedback. And there's a lot of exercise apps now that give you these little, it's a badge for running 2 miles, and a badge for running 3 miles, or you get a badge for losing 10 pounds. And it kind of feeds into those psychological needs for rewards and whatever. So and they can be cool. I use Fitbit, and Fitbit will do that when you reach certain milestones and stuff. Well, anyway, Reality Drop was built by the outfit that Al Gore does for climate education, and it was an attempt to gamify, essentially crowdsourcing people getting out there and getting good climate information out there. And this is a letter that I got from them because I am signed up on the website, and essentially they're going to turn off the gamification. I guess they've decided that it's not working that well, or there's not enough interest in it, so they're going to streamline the site. They're basically going to get rid of all the user accounts, and the site is just going to be a kind of a repository of good answers when people ask you climate questions or feed you climate nonsense, starting on Friday, and it won't be a gamified site any longer. So I guess the gamification of climate skepticism, well, not climate skepticism, but getting good climate information. One of the things they would do is they would post stories where people were commenting bad climate info in the comments and try to get pro-science people to go comment on those stories. And then they would provide links that you could drop into Facebook threads and say, no, what you're saying, Arctic ice actually isn't going up right now, or all the standard tropes that people say in the climate debate. So it's a useful site. It has kind of canned answers to that, and they had worked with some of the other folks like skepticscience.com, I think, and other people that have climate info to provide good info. Another news item that I have is this. A couple of skeptic bloggers have blogged about this. I think Novella blogged about it, Steve Novella blogged about it, maybe Gorski, but it's another ridiculous effort to strike back at Wikipedia for being so biased against pseudoscience. And usually these things Alternative medicine, yeah. Usually these things take the form of alternative Wikipedias, which never go anywhere. Deepak Chopra did one that's supposed to be some sort of science repository with
Derpapedia?
Huh?
Derpapedia?
Yeah, no. His thing is called Ishar, and I don't think he understands how the reliable sources rule on Wikipedia works, but I guess he got it in his head that if he created this really cool-looking website that had a bunch of papers about alternative science stuff that he likes on it, that then they could start to refer to that site as a reliable source in Wikipedia articles, and that would allow him to get his junk into Wikipedia articles. And so he did a Kickstarter, which failed rather horribly.
Yay!
They're launching the site, but basically it's just, huh?
He doesn't need a Kickstarter. He's frickin' rich.
Well, I know.
He should have
He
projected
doesn't
his
want to spend his
intention
own
harder.
money, Eve.
Well, this latest Kickstarter is even more hilarious because instead of creating a website to combat Wikipedia, they want to create a book. So, an instantly updatable encyclopedia of everything. They're going to combat it with a paper book that can never be updated. So they're doing a Kickstarter for $67,000 to hire researchers and stuff. And interestingly enough, although it's couched around alternative medicine, the guy who's pushing it is a neuro-linguistic programming dude. If you know anything about that, it's just complete.
Well, does that mean that
nonsense.
his Kickstarter is written in such a way that will be, even if we're totally opposed to it, we'll just give him money?
Oh, just to keep them busy writing this book as a waste of time?
Oh my God.
That's a good idea.
Because of the neuro-linguistic programming.
Oh, right. He should be able to fool us.
Must
Yeah, that's
give
true.
money.
That's true. If the
why
Kickstarter
can't they do
fails,
that?
you could portray that as a complete failure of his NLP skills.
Sort of like a psychic not knowing.
Right. And the fourth story I have is a potential legal action, which caught my eye because it seems similar to stuff we've heard before. There's this, if you're into politics, in American politics, you're probably more into this. It's not really a skeptic thing per se, but there's this outfit that kind of makes itself out as a think tank or whatever called ALEC, A-L-E-C, the American Legislative something council. But essentially what it is where a bunch of companies get together and make up laws they would like to see happen in all 50 states and then hand them out to all the legislators from the 50 states and say, here, this would be nice to have. It would be nice if there were no taxes on French fries. It would be nice if there was a law against that Bloomberg 32-ounce Coke thing in every single state so that nobody could do that again. And basically try to get their way in every state legislature to try to kind of subvert federal law. Well, anyway, one of the things they've been doing is a lot of sort of climate-oriented stuff because a lot of their sponsors are fossil fuel companies and people like the Koch brothers. And so a couple of journalists referred to ALEC as being a climate denial organization, and they've sent cease and desist letters and essentially are threatening to sue them over the denial thing. And if you recall, about 15 years ago or so, there was a big lawsuit over Holocaust denial, over this very thing where, what's his name, the original Holocaust denier dude.
Irving?
David Irving sued Deborah Lipstadt, who's a professor here at Emory University just a couple miles from me, who had written a book about Holocaust denial. And he, made her life and her publisher's lawyer's life miserable for a few years and wildly lost when the judge ruled that, yep, David Irving, you are a Holocaust denier. And this lawsuit has no merit, and he had to declare bankruptcy as a result of the lawsuit.
Did he blame the Jews?
Of course.
Didn't he then end up spending some time in jail because...
I think so, in Austria or somewhere where they have very strict laws.
He's also mentioned in Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5 as an authority about how many people were killed in the Dresden raid. But what he's quoting there is essentially Nazi propaganda about how many people died in the Dresden raid.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Okay, so that's all I've got. Those were 4 stories I noticed.
Do you think I'm willing to give up the denier thing if I'm allowed to call them global climate disaster proponents?
I'd go with that.
I think that's fair.
I'd go with that. All right, let's see. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Nathan points out that a new crowd-funded anti-wiki has exactly the error-correcting capacity that the alt-med proponents require, which is none. Alpha Ralpha says he thought Kickstarter had a rule against soliciting funds for websites. Well, it's a book, so.
Yeah. But really?
Yeah.
That seems weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's
Indiegogo
not.
doesn't, does it?
Yeah, well, you can do just about anything on Indiegogo, I think, or GoFundMe.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Who is next? I haven't checked my lineup. Oh, it is Eve. Is gonna mispronounce some Welsh words, apparently.
Yep. Yeah. And if I'm honest, although I did look up Welsh pronunciation,
You're
it's not
not
going to
honest,
help.
Dave.
It's not going to help. But if I'm honest, this story doesn't have a lot to do with skepticism. Although it is another example of misleading headlines. And I think if one wanted, one could look at the various outlets' stories and see how they've lifted information partly verbatim from the University of Cambridge's announcement, which has a Creative Commons license that actually allows them to do that, but then garbled the information rather badly, and then buried the sort of important discovery in sensationalist headlines about an interesting but less important discovery.
Don't leave us hanging.
So that's how it's supposed to work in with skepticism.
Okay.
But that's all that's really going to have anything to do with skepticism.
Hey, we'll go for it.
So it's just a cool story. So briefly, the headlines. Life Science. Ghostly faces and invisible verse found in medieval text. Daily Mail. The Book of Ghosts. That's in all caps. Eerie faces and messages discovered in ancient medieval manuscript of King Arthur and Merlin.
Oh.
So it's not a new medieval manuscript, or even, I guess, a medieval manuscript. It's an ancient medieval manuscript. And then if you hover over the tab, a pop-up says King Arthur and Merlin manuscript haunted by ghost images. IO9, UV light reveals ghostly graffiti in medieval manuscript. This is actually fairly likely, but the story's really garbled and manages to misspell many of the Welsh names, including part of the name of the manuscript. Then The Independent, the Black Book of Carmarthen. Carmarthen is what IO9 misspelled. Scholars left shaken after ultraviolet light reveals ghostly faces staring at them from medieval manuscripts.
Shaken?
Yeah.
We were looking for something that we couldn't see, and then we found it. We were scared!
I know. The BBC, despite publishing their story on April the 1st, went with the more restrained doodles and poems found in Black Book of Carmarthen. Now, admittedly, the statement put out actually by Cambridge University is titled Ghosts from the Past Brought Back to Life. So it sort of gives everyone else free rein to say whatever they want. Anyway, the Black Book of Carmarthen, which is a great name and sort of typical of really important Welsh manuscripts, like the two manuscripts that contain the so-called Mabinogion it's the White Book of something or other and the Red Book of Hurgurst or something. So, but the Black Book of Carmarthen is a small manuscript in black binding. The first slide is just a picture of the manuscript to give an idea of how large it is, and you can sort of see the black binding too around the edges. It's believed to have been associated with the priory of St. John the Evangelist and Taillythog at Carmarthen. It was compiled by a single scribe, probably an amateur, over a period of several decades in the early to mid 13th century. Every source I looked at, including Cambridge University and Wikipedia, calls it the first or the earliest extant manuscript written entirely in Welsh. The exception to that is the National Library of Wales, which owns the manuscript. They say it's one of the earliest surviving manuscripts entirely in the Welsh language. And I would tend to go with their more cautious assessment because they freaking own it. Anyway, it was part of a huge collection of manuscripts and books known as either the Penarth collection or the Hengert Penarth collection, amassed by antiquary Robert Vaughan, and it's Penarth Manuscript 1. And apparently the designation of 1 is because of its importance. Again, the National Library of Wales makes that suggestion. Now, one of the oldest and most important manuscripts of the Canterbury Tales is part of the same collection, and it's Penarth 392D. So I hope all the manuscripts aren't ranked by importance, because, well, that would make it some really very important manuscripts if Chaucer's that far down. But I think probably, aside from number 1, that they're not by rank. The Black Book is made up of 54 leaves. I had a tiny bit of reading backwards there. 54 leaves, and some leaves are missing. The scribe originally wrote in a very large hand. The next slide shows that. And it had ruled pages, and it was sort of on every other line. But then he began cramming more and more lines onto a page. The next slide illustrates that.
Oh, yeah.
Very different. And he also, and I think you can see that in this slide, drew pictures and wrote in the margins.
They look like doodles.
Oh, they kind of are doodles. He wasn't a professional.
Well,
yeah, you get a fair amount of that in medieval manuscripts, although you get some much more sophisticated ones.
Right.
His are rather charming, but not as impressive as some of the professional manuscript artists. The manuscripts primarily poetic, composed of works originally written in the 9th through 12th centuries, including some of the earliest poetic references to King Arthur, and perhaps the first to refer to him as an emperor. The manuscript also includes work to Merlin, the legendary prophet and madman that Geoffrey of Monmouth later turned into Merlin. And Geoffrey's Merlin is associated with Carmarthen, as is this manuscript. And the manuscript begins, this is the next slide, begins with a dialogue between Merlin and the bard Taliesin. And you can see in that the rubrics, the red words are Merlin and Taliesin. And again, that's early in the manuscript, so you can see far fewer words on the page.
Yep.
Now, the original scribe was not the only one who wrote in the manuscript's margins. Various owners had annotated it during the Middle Ages and early modern period, which isn't unusual. People have been writing in books, as far as I know, since there have been books. One of this manuscript's owners, however, possibly one Jasper Griffith, erased most of the added marginalia, probably with a pumice stone, though he did not erase his own name written in Hebrew or his note on the manuscript's contents. But everyone else's, he erased.
It was his book, Eve.
Yeah, it was his book. And I think they knew that there had been erasures, because you can feel it. Because, it's scraped off. So you can feel there's a roughness there. Graduate student Mariah Williams and Professor Paul Russell from Cambridge's Department of Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic looked at the manuscript under ultraviolet light, took high-resolution photos, and then enhanced them with photo editing software. So in other words, all the pictures you're about to see henceforth have been shopped, but in a good way.
Scientifically.
Yeah, I don't know if it's actually Photoshop. No, it actually gives the program's name. Now, what's gotten the most attention is the so-called ghostly faces. Next slide is the page with the faces. So you can see, if you look at the bottom margin, you can see an erased line of text and 2 drawings of faces. And you cannot see those under the visible light spectrum. The next,
Are those?
Yeah.
Is that an erased line of text, or is it an imprint from the page opposite it?
It's
No.
a different
Does it look like
size.
it's written backwards?
No, it's not. I looked at it. I can't really see it, but I thought that at first too, because you do
Oh
see
yeah,
that.
the D's. I can see
D's,
the
yeah,
yeah.
go in the direction that you'd expect them to go in.
Yeah. Okay.
You can almost see what it looks to me like the evidence of what you said about the pumice stone there, where the margins are cleaned off here.
Yeah.
But the area around the text itself hasn't been scraped.
Yeah. And I mean, whether it was pumice or something else, I mean, that's how you erase things on vellum, is that you scraped it off.
Right.
They didn't have like a little rubber eraser. So that stuff is not visible without ultraviolet light. And the next slide shows a close-up of the faces, which you can see a little bit better there. And the thing is, it almost looks like pareidolia. I mean, they are really, or were really there. But so someone really did draw those faces, but it almost looks like pareidolia. And they think the line of Welsh has something to do with one kinsman donating something, possibly the manuscript, to another kinsman.
Are those faces facing us, or is there one facing to the side? I can't really tell.
I don't know. I can't.
It looks like one is facing to the side to me.
Huh.
Oh, I thought that they were actually both facing forward. Yeah, they're both facing forward.
Yeah, so that's not even part of the doodle. The hair. Okay, yeah, the stuff around the.
It looks like a profile to me.
Yeah.
I don't think they are. That's why I said it.
No, it looks
kind
like
of look like
one facing forward and one profile.
yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know. It's
If you squint, you kind of see the 2 faces, the 2 regular facing you faces.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just want to get a screen capture of Tim making that face. That was why I did that.
Should I make that the thumbnail for this episode?
Yeah, there you go.
And they've dated the faces to the 14th or 15th century. I'm not sure on what grounds.
That's a 13th century nose, Eve.
Well, you know, I don't. If it's associated with the text, it might actually
be dateable.
They say the faces, but I mean, it might have to do with the orthography of the text. But I don't know. I didn't see that explanation. On another page, there's a drawing of a fish. Of more significance, though, or at least I think of more significance.
Do you have a picture of the ghost fish?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But what's up next is what I think is of more significance, which is a page of erased Welsh verse. So you can see that page there. You can see there's text there. Again, that is not visible without ultraviolet light.
Yeah, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Find stuff like this.
Yeah, they still need to do more analysis on the verse. As you can see, it's not that easy to see. Of course, I'm sure they have images of it that are clearer or bigger. But what they've checked against a database of Welsh verse and have not found any matches. So they believe that it's a unique text, which is cool.
Yeah.
And at this point, they think it's the continuation of the poem from the preceding page and then the start of another poem. So despite the headlines about the ghostly images, the really exciting news is the discovery of a previously unknown medieval poem or poems. And, of course, the way modern technology can force old manuscripts that have been pored over for centuries to give up new secrets. Because, again, this is, a very well-known manuscript amongst Celtic and Welsh scholar or people interested in medieval Wales.
Both of them.
Well,
Never mind.
Both Eve and the other person.
No, I don't know anything about Celtic studies.
So just that one guy.
Two of them, there's a graduate student. But no, the Anglo-Saxon, Norse, and Celtic department, so there's all of those people. And by the way, there's Wales and all the Celtic countries. They're pretty interested in Celtic stuff. Okay. And again, there's the Arthurian stuff as well. However, I should point out, just sort of parenthetically at the end here, that the technique, as far as I know, is not entirely new. In as early as the 1990s, ultraviolet, infrared, and fiber optic light were used to uncover missing or covered letters and words in the Beowulf manuscript. So, scholars...
Can I jump in and say, there was a graduate student who was teaching my freshman my freshman intro to British Lit class at Notre Dame, and she was one of the people who was working on the digital Beowulf that was going to go on a CD-ROM.
It's still on CD-ROM. The third edition, it's still on CD-ROM. It isn't a download. But which it was cutting edge at the time. But yeah, the electronic Beowulf. So, you know, I'm sure the techniques have been improved, and I believe, you know, they were looking at this manuscript much more extensively, because with the Beowulf manuscript, I think they knew specific places where it's like, we want to look at this, and we want to look at this, rather than such a huge swath of the manuscript. But, you know, it's not completely new. But there is the possibility of new discoveries to be made in something like medieval manuscript studies. Yay.
No. Cool. Wasn't there a thing, I don't know if we talked about it on the show, where they were using, it wasn't ultraviolet light, but another sort of scanning thing where they had some scrolls that were rolled up and too brittle to unroll, so they were using like scanners to scan in and figure out what was written on the scrolls without actually...
That was Herculaneum. That was the Herculaneum library that was found. The scrolls were desiccated instantly by the blast of heat and carbonized, and when you go and look at the papyrus scrolls, you can, you know, when scanned, you can read the writing. It's going to take a long time to tease out, but that's a real thing.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Freaking awesome, by the way, because so much has been lost in the intervening years.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Cool. All right. So, my thing is yelling at me over there. So, I guess it's Bob's turn.
Well, yeah, so it's been a while since I've had a chance to talk about the 9/11 Truth Movement. A movement, as best I can tell, is fading, but every so often they come out with a couple of amusing headlines. And the last couple of months have been interesting. So my story begins in 2009 with the publication of, and if you could bring up the first image, of a paper by Niels Harrit and other luminaries of the Truther movement called Active Thermitic Material Discovered in Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe. Now, even though this wasn't the first place to suggest that nanothermite had been used to bring down the World Trade Center, you know, some of the co-authors on there, especially Stephen Jones and I think Kevin Ryan as well, they had written about magic thermite being used to bring down the World Trade Center as early as 2007, but they were just like basically published on their mom's website. I mean, like just a truther, you know, journals or something. I mean, it wasn't a real journal. But this article was touted as being the real deal, as it was published, as you can see at the top, if it's big enough, the Open Chemical Physics Journal. Okay, it turns out that the Open Chemical Physics Journal is a press, a title done by Bentham Open, which happens to be on Beale's list of potential, possible, or probable predatory scholarly open access publishers. So perhaps not so reliable. You know, kind of pay to play. So a lot of the places where Brzezinski publishes also on Beale's list. When the paper came out, the journal editor resigned because it had been published without her knowledge or permission.
Oh,
and
wow.
she realized the type,
Wow.
Yeah, and so she realized the type of outfit she was working for, right? So the paper described little red and gray chips and, quote, iron-rich microspheres that were found in the World Trade Center dust. And it was therefore concluded that super thermite was used to bring it down in a controlled demolition so it fell at free fall speed in its own footprint, whatever. Despite that lasted for about 5 minutes. There were lots of problems with the paper, not the least of which was the provenance of the samples, but even what was found could be explained as building material with paint on it. And the microspheres, they never bothered to distinguish between the little tiny iron spheres that would come, say, in laser jet toner, which would have been on every burning piece of paper in the Twin Towers, versus the type that comes from super thermite, which has never been used to bring down a building. Okay, so there's some problems with this. But the truthers hold this crummy article up as evidence of, you know, peer review. They love peer review, except clearly it wasn't. And they use it as evidence that the collapses need to be reinvestigated. Well, on Friday, December 7th, 2012, a date that will live in infamy among 9/11 truthers, an editorial appeared in a Danish paper, Weekendavisen, called Madness in the Royal Library. The author, Soren Vilmos, criticized the Royal Library's decision to host a Turkish exhibit about the Armenian genocide from the perspective of the Turkish government. Oh, my God.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so not the best moment for this library. Don't get me wrong. They should be allowed to say things, but really? Okay, so this author, Vilmos, said in what looks like an editorial, is the library soon going to open its doors to an exhibition showing the alternative theories about evolution? Why not just invite Niels Harrit and other crackpots from the 9/11 Skeptics movement while we're at it? What about the Holocaust denial movement? Okay. Actually, I got a letter from someone who, like, apparently runs into Harrit every so often. So apparently, in Copenhagen, he is much more high profile than he is over here.
Yeah, I'd never heard of him before.
Yeah.
I don't follow 9/11 stuff.
Yeah, if you follow 9/11 Truth, you can't get around him. He's everywhere. I think he's part of the 9/11 Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and yeah. So anyway, Harrit sued for libel in 2013. So you see the paper and the author, and it has to do with that word crackpot. In 2014, Harrit represented himself in the lower city court.
Always a good sign.
Always a good idea. And the court rejected his lawsuit. He appealed, and he took the case to the Supreme Court, basically. And the journey through the courts was documented by Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, mostly in emails that end up directly in my spam folder. Yeah. So AE 9/11 sent me an email in late February. It was a spam email, right? Looking to raise $15,000 for Harrit's legal fund in a week.
In a week?
In a week.
Because they waited.
They raised it. They made it.
No.
Yes.
Oh, that makes me sick.
They're so... I mean, these alt-crank knowledge outfits are really good at squeezing money out of their followers' beliefs. Scientology. So they actually raised it. On March 12th, Harrit appeared in court to make his case, this time with a lawyer who I'm guessing charged about $15,000. Apparently, and if you could bring up the next image, it was billed as a sort of Lollapalooza for morons. It was the 9/11 Truth groups seem to be really good at like self-promotion.
Right.
And manufacturing their own news events that then they add like some sort of significance to it, which nobody else recognizes. And this is another instance of that.
So this is a graphic for a court hearing.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, yeah. So on the 23rd of March, I got an email that was titled, Niels Harrit wows Danish courtroom. And I imagine that this is the best possible spin on the judge saying, wow, I can't believe I'm sitting here listening to this.
Well, as I understand it, he did a rousing rendition of The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music.
That's true. It's true. And I mean, that was kind of his wrap-up. Actually, I've got his wrap-up right here. Hold on. So, according to the email from A&E 9/11, quote, during the 4-hour hearing, Dr. Harrit performed a masterclass for the 3 judges and 20 onlookers in the packed courtroom, both with his legal reasoning and with his presentation of the World Trade Center evidence. A decision
really
from the
what it
judges
says?
is expected on April 9th. Huh?
That's really what it says.
I shit you not.
Oh my God.
Okay, so they reposted what has to be the most nauseating, completely obsequious and sniveling glob of abject sycophancy ever published on the wackosphere. They, without irony, approved of how Harrit wrapped up his case. And this is a quote from the letter. Harrit referred to the historical court case against Galileo Galilei in 1633.
Of course.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know. Where the accused was brought in.
Proof he's a crackpot?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
But so all right. So where the accused was brought in front of the Inquisition of the Roman Catholic Church and tortured until he renounced his belief that the Earth rotated around the sun and acknowledged that the Earth was the center of the universe. When he concluded his procedure, there was no doubt that Dr. Harrit had made an impact upon the High Court. You can go back to that image. To the High Court. The 3 judges looked as if they approved the legal points he made, and both Villamos and his lawyer appeared a bit shaken. Bring up the next image.
Oops.
They were
There we go.
Yeah. So,
probably shaken from banging their head on the desk.
I know. Like it's like you ended up walking into, Richard Gage's 600 slide long PowerPoint presentation.
I know this is a minor point, but wasn't Galileo just shown the rap, basically?
They didn't torture him.
Yeah, they
They just promised it.
suggested that perhaps they might.
And the other thing was that, like, this asshat wasn't dragged in front of the court. This guy appealed.
Right.
You know, so he seems to be using the court as a place to spout his tripe.
Which he did. He instead of sort of arguing the libel case, he was arguing the 9/11 case.
Exactly. So he's kind of abusing the court system, as far as I can tell.
Actually, from what I understand, that in Denmark, you're allowed to bring in so-called new evidence during an appeal.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure that technically, from a legal perspective, if he was abusing.
I mean, apparently it was fine because he got to do it for 4 hours. But so at the beginning of the week, the court found apparently that the reporter had not libeled Harrit when they called him a tossa. Tossa is the word that was used and is translated as crackpot in the 9/11 Truther Press. The other translations I've seen have been idiot, fool, simpleton, or nincompoop. Eve looked up the
Etymology.
The etymology of the word, and it seems to be related to giants.
Thors. Yeah.
Big
I'm not
galoot.
sure if this is true, but it seems to be that it's
Big dumb galoots.
They called him a dumb shit.
Basically, the case was dismissed and sanity ruled the day. Hooray!
Yay!
Hey, has anyone considered the possibility that the Twin Towers were taken down by frost giants? Sorry.
That's hilarious. And if I weren't freezing for humorous effect, I would comment.
Freeze for humorous effect.
Like the end of a 1980s sitcom.
Roll credits.
Yeah.
We're out. All right.
So yeah, that was the 9/11 truther story. He lost resoundingly. I didn't see a lot of coverage of his loss in the 9/11 truther community, but they did say that it was clear that like all law was now obsolete or something.
Yeah, and it was political and
it was political,
not.
Yeah, the word is tossa there, but
is that the headline from this week?
Yeah.
All right.
So
cool.
That was that.
That's good. I guess I should put that in skeptic history for future use. Excellent. Do we have any questions? Anybody's asking. I don't see any in the Q&A.
I forgot my book. I'm going to go back and get it. I'll be right back.
Yeah, get ready to do book time if you haven't already. Just looking around to see. Okay. So, get ready to do book time, but I will answer the trivia question. We had a couple people who got it right, but I believe that Alex Murdoch was the first to get it right.
Yeah.
The question was, what was William Mumler known for? William Mumler of New York City in the 19th century. He was the original spirit photographer who would take these photos of people sitting in chairs, and then there would be this mysterious ghostly image when you developed the film. And, of course, he was just double exposing the film and was actually accused in April of 1869 of fraud, but let off when the judge wasn't convinced, and he went and set back up shop in Boston and was making spirit photographs for many years afterwards,
including Mary Lincoln's.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and actually, in the spirit of my news blur, while you guys are getting your books ready, I've noticed two different interesting skeptic-related news stories have happened while we were on the air. Huh. One is that there's a story in the New York Times that President Obama is planning on proposing some sort of nationwide ban on reparative therapy. This is the anti-gay.
Yeah, I saw that earlier today. Yeah.
I hadn't seen it earlier, so that would be good. And just in the last few minutes, SB 277 in California, which is a bill to reduce the number of exemptions you can get for vaccines and tighten the rules on that, has passed through committee. So that's good news too. So, all right, who's ready with their book?
I am.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, wait, sorry.
You're not?
No, I am.
Okay, go ahead.
Being, as Sister Mary said, a tomboy, I led the girls into the boys' games. We played ante-over, pull-away, prisoner's base, and handball. Only one boy in the school could run faster than me, and not always could he do it. When the boys saw how well we could play, in an hour of triumph, they took us into their baseball game, and we played the rest of the summer, much to the scandal of Mary and Anna, Laura and Christy, and Ida and May Cochran, all the big girls being ladies.
All right, who's next?
Ooh, what's that?
Steve, you ready?
Yes. A special role for women was that of the vulva, a satyr or kind of seer who was able to enter into a trance. It was also believed that she could predict the future, a quality shared with the Old Norse goddess Freya. The Völlr and their deeds are described in mythological contexts such as the prophecy of the Vylva in the Völuspá section of the Poetic Edda, as well as the more narrative saga of Eric the Red. She is presented in both sources as a respected, even revered woman. The Vylva carried its distinctive staff that she used during her visions. The word Vylva means staff carrier.
Bob?
The birth of Oliver Cromwell is not far off to a man whose prophetic insight stretched 7,000 years beyond his own lifetime. He had little love for the fiery Puritan leader of the Roundheads. Cromwell would butcher, quote, a king and, quote, bleed England as a dictator. The prophet does not begrudge the man his key role in making England a world power, however, but through the help of his brass bull, Nostradamus was privileged with a vision few others saw. The man who publicly... Oh, wow, I'm just going to choke and die at the mention of Nostradamus. So we're done.
Bob was killed by his own book.
Yeah.
And here's mine. It was my 28th birthday. The year before, I'd gotten my hands on the shooting script of Jerry Lewis's The Day the Clown Cried. It was a drama about a clown in Auschwitz, forced by the Nazis to entertain Jewish children on their way to the gas chamber. If he does this, his life will be spared. But his conscience can't bear the burden, so at the last minute, he enters the gas chamber with them. Slam! Hiss! Fade to black. The script was originally written by Joan O'Brien and Charles Denton, but when Jerry Lewis decided to make it, he made revisions. Slapstick. Pratfalls. A scene where it's so cold in the concentration camp barracks that the clown, named Helmut Dork, pisses ice. It was glorious. As Harry Shearer wrote in a Spy magazine article about actually being able to see the movie, quote, it was like going down to Tijuana and seeing a painting on black velvet of Auschwitz.
That's horrifying!
Wow.
It is horrifying.
Wow.
Barb, what was your book?
Mine is Pioneer Girl. Laura Ingalls Wilder. It's the original manuscript. It's an annotated version. So it's like they published the actually there's more footnotes, about 3 times as much text in the footnotes as there is. But it's great.
Is it a Norton Critical edition?
No.
No.
No, it is. It's. I'm not even sure who they publish with. But it's interesting. I mean, a historian basically edited the whole thing, and
neat.
They transcribed the original handwritten tablets and
right.
Annotated everything. So, very cool.
Eve?
Vikings. Beyond the Legend by Gunnar Andersson, which from the Australian National Maritime Museum and the Swedish History Museum, but it's also it's like the program of the Field Museum.
Cool.
Current thing. More pictures.
Bob? Oops.
John Hogue's Nostradamus and the Millennium.
You trying to get David Mabus fired back up again?
How's he doing?
He's don't ask. There's supposed to be a hearing in June. My book was from, oops, helps if the phone is lit up, was a book called Silver Screen Fiend by Patton Oswalt, the comedian, and it's about his obsession with watching every movie that he could get a hold of, and partially a memoir, but it's a neat little book. And I've been listening to it on audiobook recently. So, anything else we got to cover? Oh yeah, announcements. Skepticality this week has got Eve in it, but not me, and not Bob. So check that out. It's got some other cool stuff, and Bob is going to be at RavenCon in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And I'm going to be at Orange County Free Thought in California in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? 4 weeks? May 3rd, whatever that is.
It's in May.
Yeah.
It's 4 weeks.
Around the 3rd.
And
Week
All right.
third.
Well, I guess we're done. I guess this brings us to the end of another virtual Skeptics.
You have failed to bring us in on time, Tim.
I know. Well, can't all be winners. Let me get my scripty thing ready to go. Time to dance. The Virtual Skeptics is an independent production of whatsaharm.net, Skeptical Humanities, Brian Gregory, ICBS Everywhere, and Doubtful News. Our logo was designed by Sarah Mayhew at sarahmayhew.com. Our theme music is by Musicant and is used with permission.